What starts as a simple lemonade stand for charity turns into an intense showdown when 16-year-old Layla Thompson faces off against Chief Gerald Halloway, a police officer determined to shut her down. With the community divided and tensions rising, Layla's fight for justice becomes much bigger than she ever imagined. Will she stand her ground and inspire change, or will the chief's authority win out? What do you think will happen? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and tap the notification bell to catch all our upcoming stories. Let's dive in. Layla Thompson stood at the entrance of Bridgestone High School, adjusting the straps of her heavy backpack, which bulged with textbooks. The familiar hum of teenage conversation floated around her as students poured out of the school, their laughter and chatter echoing down the busy halls and spilling out onto the sidewalks. Layla glanced at her phone. No messages from her dad, which wasn't surprising. He rarely texted during the day. Layla's deep brown eyes scanned her surroundings, her mind already drifting away from the carefree gossip and the latest TikTok challenges that surrounded her. Unlike her peers, she wasn't focused on after-school hangouts or weekend parties. Layla's thoughts were elsewhere, on her future and the path she was determined to carve out for herself. She had a plan. She always had a plan. It was why, at 16, she felt different from most of the kids around her. While they were excited about the next basketball game or a trip to the mall, Layla was thinking about medical school, health disparities, and the kids she dreamed of helping one day. "Layla, wait up!" a familiar voice called from behind her. Layla turned and saw her best friend, Sarah James, jogging toward her. Sarah's blonde hair bounced in its loose ponytail, her pale face flushed from the run. "You heading home already?" "Yeah," Layla replied, offering a small smile. "I've got to work on some stuff for my project." "The lemonade stand, remember?" Sarah gave her a tired grin. "How could I forget? You've been talking about it for weeks. When's the big day?" "Saturday." Layla's eyes brightened. "I'm hoping to raise a good amount for the Children's Healthcare Fund." Sarah's smile faded slightly, but she tried to keep it up for Layla's sake. "You're amazing, you know that? I don't know how you find time to juggle all this." Layla shrugged. "It's important. If we don't start somewhere, nothing will ever change. Besides, I've been planning this for months. It's my first real step toward making a difference." They walked together in companionable silence for a moment, passing groups of students excitedly discussing their weekend plans. Layla couldn't help but feel slightly disconnected. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy hanging out with her friends, but lately, it felt like her goals had pushed her further away from the typical high school experience. "You know," Sarah started, her voice quieter now, "I'm not sure I can come help with the stand this weekend. My mom needs me to pick up some extra hours at the diner." Layla's heart sank, but she quickly masked her disappointment. Sarah had been dealing with a lot at home lately. "I understand," Layla said gently. "Family comes first." Sarah nodded, biting her lip. "Yeah, it's just, things are kind of tough right now. You know how it is." Layla did know. Sarah's dad had been out of work for nearly a year, and her mom was juggling 2 jobs just to keep their heads above water. Layla admired Sarah's resilience, but it pained her to see her friend struggling. As they reached the corner where their paths diverged, Layla turned to her with a soft smile. "It's okay, Sarah. We'll catch up later. And if you can't make it, don't worry. I've got this." Sarah nodded, her face relieved but still troubled. "Thanks, Layla. You're always so positive. Someone's got to be, right?" Layla chuckled, giving her friend a quick hug before heading toward home. The walk home was peaceful, the autumn air crisp and cool as the last of the sun's rays filtered through the trees. Layla lived in the quieter part of Bridgestone, where houses sat farther apart and the streets felt less crowded. It was the kind of place where you could hear kids playing in their yards, the occasional bark of a dog, and the steady hum of distant lawn mowers. As she approached her house, Layla's thoughts drifted to her father, David Thompson. He wasn't home yet. He rarely was before dark, but his presence was always felt. Though Layla didn't know all the details of his job, she knew it was dangerous and that he kept his work private for a reason. Sometimes, Layla wished he could talk about it more openly, but she understood why he couldn't. When she entered their modest two-story home, the familiar comfort of it wrapped around her like a blanket. Layla dropped her backpack by the door and made her way to the kitchen, where her mother, Lisa, was finishing up a batch of cookies for the church bake sale. "Hey, sweetheart," her mother greeted her with a warm smile. "How was school?" "Good, Mom," Layla replied, grabbing a cookie off the cooling rack. "I finalized the plans for the lemonade stand. I'm setting it up at the community center on Saturday." Lisa beamed with pride. "You're really doing something special, Layla. That fundraiser will make such a difference." "I hope so." Layla leaned against the counter, nibbling her cookie thoughtfully. "I just want to help kids who don't have access to health care. It's such a simple thing, but it means everything to them." Her mother's expression softened. "You've got a big heart, Layla. That's what makes you special." Layla smiled but didn't say much in response. She had heard those words before, but she always felt like she could be doing more. Being compassionate wasn't enough. She wanted to act, to make real change in the world. This lemonade stand, small as it was, felt like the first step towards something bigger. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Glancing at the screen, Layla saw a message from her dad. "Running late. Be home by 9. Proud of you?" The simple words brought a smile to her face. "Dad's late again," she said, though there was no bitterness in her tone. Lisa sighed but smiled softly. "You know how his job is. But you know he's proud of you, right?" "I know, Mom." After finishing the cookie, Layla went upstairs to her room. It was small but cozy, with posters of famous doctors and inspirational quotes lining the walls. A stack of anatomy textbooks sat on her desk, next to her well-worn laptop, where she'd spent countless hours studying and researching for her future career. Becoming a doctor wasn't just a dream, it was a calling. Opening her laptop, she began working on the final details for her lemonade stand. She had already designed flyers, set up social media posts, and reached out to local businesses for donations. The goal was simple: raise as much money as possible to help children in developing countries get the medical care they needed. Layla knew that her efforts were just a small drop in the ocean of global problems, but every drop counted. Her father had taught her that much. He always said that real change started with small actions, and that's what Layla believed. As she typed out a final reminder post for her school's online bulletin board, her thoughts turned back to Sarah. Layla wished her friend could be there on Saturday, but she knew how tough things were for her. Still, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was slipping away. The weight of their different lives, Layla's focus on school and her future, and Sarah's struggles with her family, was pulling them in opposite directions. Layla leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen, but seeing something else entirely. She had always believed that if she just worked hard enough, everything would fall into place. But lately, she was starting to realize that the world didn't always work that way. People had their own battles to fight, and sometimes, no matter how much you wanted to help, you couldn't fix everything. Still, she had to try. She would never stop trying. That night, as Layla lay in bed, her mind buzzed with thoughts of the future. The lemonade stand was just a start. She dreamed of one day working in a hospital, treating patients from all walks of life, maybe even traveling to other countries to help children who didn't have access to basic health care. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her to stay focused and strong. Layla had always admired his calm, steady demeanor, especially given the nature of his work. He never let fear or uncertainty show, and Layla wanted to be just as composed in the face of adversity. She closed her eyes, imagining the children she would one day help, their smiling faces as they received the care they so desperately needed. It was this vision that kept her motivated, even on the days when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. Layla fell asleep with a sense of purpose, knowing that Saturday's lemonade stand was just the beginning of her journey. In the next chapter, Layla sets up her lemonade stand at the community center. While she finds support from her neighbors and friends, her first encounter with Chief Gerald Halloway brings the first real challenge. The tension between Layla's vision for change and Halloway's desire to maintain control over the town sets the stage for the coming conflict. The sun was just beginning to rise on Saturday morning as Layla stood outside the Bridgestone Community Center, carefully setting up her lemonade stand. The small table, draped in a bright yellow cloth, was already adorned with pitchers of freshly made lemonade and stacks of paper cups. Layla's hand-painted sign, which read, "Lemonade for Charity, $1 per cup. Help provide health care to children in need," hung proudly in front of the table. The community center was quiet at this early hour, but Layla felt a bubbling sense of excitement. Today was the day she'd been working toward for months, and she was determined to make it a success. The money raised might be small compared to the enormous need she wanted to address, but it was a start. Layla believed in the power of small actions. Her father had always told her that even the smallest spark could ignite a much larger fire of change. "Morning, Layla," called a familiar voice, breaking her from her thoughts. Layla looked up to see Mrs. Pamela Green, the retired physician who had been one of her biggest supporters, walking toward her. Ms. Green's silver hair shimmered in the early morning light, and her warm smile immediately put Layla at ease. "Miss Green! You're early," Layla said, returning the smile. "Couldn't sleep, Miss," Green replied, waving her hand dismissively. "I wanted to stop by before my morning walk and see how you're doing. Everything looks wonderful. You've done an amazing job organizing this, Layla. I'm so proud of you." Layla beamed at the compliment. "Thank you, Miss Green. I just hope people show up." "They will," Mrs. Green said confidently, placing a hand on Layla's shoulder. "You're doing something important. And even if only a few people come, that's a few more children who will benefit from the health care they need. You're making a difference, and that's what counts." Layla nodded, feeling her confidence return. Ms. Green always had a way of calming her nerves. "You've been such an inspiration to me, Mrs. Green. I wouldn't have even thought about doing this if it weren't for all the stories you've told me about your work." Ms. Green smiled warmly, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You're going to go much further than I ever did, Layla. You have the kind of determination that changes the world." Before Layla could respond, they were interrupted by a cheerful voice calling from down the street. "Lemonade! Just what I need on a day like this." Layla turned to see Mr. Johnson, an elderly man who lived in the neighborhood, hobbling toward them with his cane. He was always one of the first to support community events, and his good-natured attitude made him a favorite among the locals. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," Layla greeted him with a wide smile. "You're my first customer today." "Well, I'm honored," Mr. Johnson said with a wink, fishing out a few crumpled dollar bills from his pocket. "Give me a cup of that lemonade, and keep the change. I want to help the kids." Layla poured him a generous cup of lemonade and handed it to him with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. This means a lot." As the morning wore on, more people began to trickle by, buying cups of lemonade and offering donations for the cause. Layla chatted with neighbors, handing out drinks and explaining the purpose of her fundraiser. The sense of community was heartwarming, and with each sale, she felt more confident that she was doing something worthwhile. Everything was going smoothly until just after noon, when Layla noticed a police cruiser slowly pulling up to the curb. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the officer stepping out, Chief Gerald Halloway. Chief Halloway was an imposing figure, with a square jaw and a no-nonsense expression that seemed to intimidate everyone around him. He was known for being tough on crime, but there were whispers around town that his attitude toward certain groups of people was less than fair. Layla had never had a personal run-in with him before, but she had seen the way he interacted with people who didn't quite fit his mold of what Bridgestone should be. Layla kept her composure as Chief Halloway walked toward her, his eyes scanning the lemonade stand with what looked like disapproval. He stopped in front of the table, folding his arms across his chest. "Young lady," he said, his voice gravelly, "what's going on here?" Layla swallowed her nerves and offered him a polite smile. "Good afternoon, Chief Halloway. I'm raising money for charity, specifically for children who don't have access to health care. It's a fundraiser." Halloway's brow furrowed as he glanced at the sign. "A fundraiser, huh? You got a permit for this?" Layla blinked, confused. "A permit? I didn't realize I needed one." It's just a lemonade stand for charity. Well, you do, Holloway said gruffly. Any kind of public operation like this requires a permit, even if it's for charity. Layla's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. I'm sorry, Chief. I didn't know. I can pack up if I'm breaking any rules. Holloway narrowed his eyes, his stance stiffening. This isn't just about packing up. You can't just set up shop wherever you please, permit or not. You're creating a public health risk. Who knows if this lemonade is even safe to drink? Layla felt a wave of indignation rising inside her, but she held it back. I promise it's just lemonade. Nothing dangerous. I'm only trying to help. Chief Holloway scoffed, clearly not interested in her explanation. That's not for you to decide. There are rules, and they're there for a reason. You need to shut this down immediately. Before Layla could respond, she saw Officer Jack Cooper stepping out of the cruiser. He was much younger than Holloway, with a more approachable demeanor, though he seemed uneasy as he approached them. Layla had seen him around town before, and unlike Holloway, he didn't have a reputation for being overly harsh. "Chief," Officer Cooper said, his voice calm, "maybe we could give her a warning. She didn't know about the permit, and it's for charity." Holloway shot him a sharp look. "This isn't a discussion, Cooper. The rules are the rules." Layla's hands trembled slightly as she watched the two officers, but she forced herself to stay calm. She remembered what her father had always told her. Speak clearly. Don't let them rattle you. She wasn't about to let this turn into something bigger than it needed to be. "Chief Holloway," Layla began, her voice respectful but firm, "I understand the importance of following rules, and if I need to pack up, I will. But this stand is for charity. I'm raising money to help kids who don't have access to health care. If there's a way I can make this right, I'd be happy to comply." Holloway stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, Layla thought he might relent. But then he shook his head. "I'm shutting this down," he said coldly. "Now." Layla's chest tightened as Holloway turned to Officer Cooper. "Cooper, take care of this. I'll be inside checking on the community center." Officer Cooper hesitated, glancing between Layla and his superior. "Chief, I don't think this is—" "Now, Cooper," Holloway snapped, his voice hard. With a resigned sigh, Officer Cooper stepped forward. "Miss Thompson, I'm going to have to ask you to stop serving lemonade and pack up the stand." Layla felt a knot form in her stomach, but she nodded. "I'll do that." As she began to pack up, the air around her felt thick with tension. She had known there would be obstacles, but she hadn't expected this kind of pushback. Still, she wasn't about to let this stop her. Officer Cooper lingered for a moment, watching her pack away the cups and pitchers. His face softened slightly as he spoke. "I'm sorry about this. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. But Holloway, well, he's got his own way of handling things." Layla looked up at him, her resolve hardening. "It's okay. I'll figure something out." Officer Cooper gave her a sympathetic nod before turning to follow Holloway inside the community center. Layla stood there for a moment, staring at the nearly empty table. Her heart was heavy, but her determination had only grown stronger. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. In the next chapter, Layla discusses the encounter with her father, David Thompson, and tensions between Layla and Chief Holloway begin to escalate. As Layla's lemonade stand gains attention, her father's past and profession become increasingly relevant to the unfolding events. Later that evening, the Thompson house was quiet, with only the soft sound of the television playing in the background. Layla sat at the kitchen table, staring down at her phone, waiting for her father to come home. The earlier encounter with Chief Holloway kept replaying in her mind. She had done everything right, had stayed calm, respectful, and composed, and yet it had still ended with her lemonade stand being shut down. The front door creaked open, and Layla glanced up to see her father, David, walking in. He looked as he always did after a long day of work, tired but alert, his eyes scanning the room as though he were always assessing the situation. Layla could see the lines of stress around his eyes, the weight of his job as an FBI agent never far from his shoulders. "Hey, Dad," she said, trying to keep her voice light. David gave her a warm smile, though it quickly faded when he saw the tension in her expression. "Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay?" Layla hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Not really. Something happened today." David's brow furrowed as he took a seat across from her. "Tell me." Layla recounted the incident at the lemonade stand, the unexpected arrival of Chief Holloway, his demand that she shut down her stand, and Officer Cooper's reluctant compliance. As she spoke, she watched her father's face carefully. His expression remained calm, but she could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. When she finished, David sat back in his chair, his face thoughtful. He was quiet for a long moment, and Layla could tell he was processing the situation in the way he always did. Carefully, strategically. "I'm sorry that happened, Layla," he said finally, his voice low. "I'm proud of the way you handled it, but it shouldn't have come to that." Layla sighed, frustration bubbling up. "I just don't understand why he had to make such a big deal out of it." "It was for charity, Dad. I wasn't hurting anyone." David nodded slowly. "I know. But Chief Holloway, he's not the kind of man who likes change. He's old school, and from what I've heard, he doesn't take kindly to anyone stepping outside the lines, even when it's for a good cause." Layla's eyes narrowed. "Is it because of who I am? Because I'm black?" David hesitated, and for a brief moment, Layla saw something in his expression that confirmed what she had suspected. He didn't need to say the words for her to know the truth. "I'm not going to lie to you, Layla," David said softly. "There's a good chance that played a part in it. But it's more than that. Holloway is the kind of man who wants to control everything in this town. He sees your lemonade stand as a challenge to his authority, and he's not used to people standing up to him." Layla's chest tightened with anger. "I wasn't trying to challenge him. I just wanted to help people." David leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "I know, but sometimes doing the right thing is going to feel like a challenge to the people who don't want things to change. And when that happens, they'll push back. Hard." Layla's frustration was palpable, but she knew her father was right. She had felt it in the way Holloway looked at her, as though she didn't belong, as though her simple act of kindness was somehow threatening the order of things in Bridgestone. It wasn't fair, but fairness had never been guaranteed. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice quieter. David took a deep breath, his face softening. "You keep going. You don't let people like Holloway stop you from doing what's right. But you also have to be smart about it. This isn't the last time you'll face resistance, Layla. You're strong, but you need to be prepared." There was a heaviness in his tone that Layla couldn't ignore. She knew her father had seen more of the world's ugliness than he let on. His job required him to keep secrets, but the weight of those secrets sometimes spilled over into their lives in subtle ways. "I'm not giving up," Layla said firmly, determination filling her voice. "I'll find another way." David smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "That's my girl. But promise me you'll be careful. If Holloway comes after you again, you call me. No matter what." Layla nodded, her heart swelling with love for her father. "I promise." David stood and crossed the room, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "Get some rest. You've got a big future ahead of you, and this is just the beginning." Monday morning at Bridgestone High felt different. Layla could feel the eyes on her as she walked through the halls, and whispers followed her wherever she went. News of her run-in with Chief Holloway had spread quickly, and by the time she reached her locker, it seemed like half the school was talking about it. Sarah was waiting for her at the lockers, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Layla, I heard about what happened at your lemonade stand. Are you okay?" Layla shrugged, trying to brush it off, even though the encounter still weighed heavily on her mind. "Yeah, I'm fine. It was just frustrating." Sarah's brow furrowed as she leaned against the locker next to Layla. "I don't get it. Why would Holloway care about a lemonade stand? That's ridiculous." Layla hesitated, unsure of how much she wanted to get into it. She knew Sarah meant well, but sometimes it was hard to explain the subtle undercurrents of racism and control that people like Holloway embodied. "It's complicated," Layla said, closing her locker with a sigh. "I think it's more about him wanting to control things in this town. People like him, they don't like seeing change." Sarah nodded, though her expression showed she didn't fully understand. "Well, it's still stupid. You were just trying to help people. If anyone should be in trouble, it's him." Layla couldn't help but smile at Sarah's bluntness. "I wish it were that simple." As they made their way to class, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get more complicated. Sure enough, when they entered the cafeteria at lunchtime, she noticed a group of boys from the football team glancing her way. One of them, Jake Porter, leaned over to whisper something to his friends, who laughed under their breath. Layla ignored them, but as she walked past their table, Jake called out, "Hey, Layla! When's your next fundraiser? Maybe you can get Holloway to sponsor it." His friends snickered, and Layla felt her face heat up with anger. Sarah shot them a glare but didn't say anything, and Layla decided to keep walking. Her father's advice playing in her mind. Don't let them rattle you. But it wasn't just the boys at school. As the week went on, Layla noticed the division in the community more and more. Some of her neighbors and classmates supported her cause, offering words of encouragement and praise for standing up to Chief Holloway. Others, however, seemed to agree with Holloway, viewing Layla's lemonade stand as some kind of threat to the town's status quo. Ms. Green, as always, was on Layla's side. She invited Layla to her home after school one day to talk about what had happened and offer some advice. "I've been in your shoes before, Layla, Miss," Green said, as they sat together in her cozy living room, sipping tea. "People don't like change, especially when they feel like it threatens their control. But that's why it's so important to keep going. What you're doing matters, even if it feels like you're facing resistance." Layla nodded, feeling the weight of Mrs. Green's words. "It just feels so unfair. I didn't do anything wrong, but it's like people are trying to make me the villain." Ms. Green smiled gently. "I know. It's frustrating and it's exhausting. But if you keep fighting, you'll find that there are more people on your side than you realize. And eventually, even those who resist will have to come around." Layla looked down at her cup of tea, her mind racing. She had always known that her path would be difficult, that standing up for what was right would come with challenges, but she hadn't expected it to start so soon or to feel so personal. "You're strong, Layla," Mrs. Green said, reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're going to do amazing things. Don't let anyone, especially people like Holloway, make you doubt that." That evening, as Layla sat in her room, staring at her anatomy textbook, her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about what Mrs. Green had said, about resistance and control, about not giving up. Layla had always believed that if you worked hard and did the right thing, good things would follow. But now, she was starting to realize that the world didn't always work that way. There were people, powerful people, who didn't want things to change, and they would do whatever they could to stop it. But Layla wasn't going to let that stop her. Not now, not ever. She glanced over at the small sign she had made for the lemonade stand, now propped up against her desk. The words "help provide health care to children in need" still held so much meaning to her, even if the stand had been shut down. Layla picked up her phone and sent a text to her father. "I'm not giving up. I'll find another way." David replied almost immediately, "I know you will. I'm proud of you, Layla. Stay strong." With renewed determination, Layla closed her textbook and began making plans for what was to come next. By the end of the week, Layla had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let Chief Holloway's attempt to shut her down be the final word on her lemonade stand. It wasn't just about raising money for the children anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about proving that she could make a difference even in the face of adversity. On Saturday morning, Layla sat at the kitchen table, a stack of permit forms spread out in front of her. She had spent hours researching the rules for setting up a stand in public spaces, determined to ensure that everything was by the book this time. The last thing she wanted was for Holloway to have another excuse to shut her down. Her father, David, sat across from her, reviewing the forms with a careful eye. He hadn't said much since the incident with Chief Holloway, but Layla knew that he supported her. The pride in his eyes whenever he looked at her was enough to keep her moving forward. "These look good," David said, handing back the papers. "You've got everything you need. You'll be ready to go next weekend." Layla smiled, feeling a sense of relief. Thanks, Dad. I just want to make sure everything's perfect this time. I don't want Holloway or anyone else to have any reason to stop me. David nodded, his expression serious. You're doing the right thing, Layla. But remember, this might not be the last time you face pushback. People like Holloway don't give up easily. I know, Layla said softly, but I'm not giving up either. Lisa, Layla's mother, entered the kitchen with a cup of coffee, her face bright with pride. You've always been such a fighter, Layla. I know this won't be easy, but you've got the whole community behind you. And your father and I are with you every step of the way. Layla felt a swell of gratitude for her parents' support. It wasn't always easy being the daughter of an FBI agent, especially when so much of her father's work was kept secret. But in moments like these, she knew that their bond was stronger than anything. By the time the next weekend rolled around, Layla's lemonade stand was set up once again in front of the Bridgestone Community Center. This time, she had all the necessary permits in hand, and everything was ready to go. She felt a new sense of confidence as she arranged the table, setting out the pitchers of lemonade, stacks of cups, and her now familiar sign, Lemonade for Charity. Help provide health care to children in need. As people began to stop by, offering their support and donations, Layla felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. This was what she had been working for. Despite the obstacles, despite the challenges, she was making a difference. Her best friend Sarah arrived a little later, hurrying over with a guilty look on her face. Layla, I'm so sorry I couldn't make it last weekend. My mom needed me to help out at the diner, and things have been so crazy at home. Layla waved her off with a smile. It's okay, Sarah. I know things have been tough for you. I'm just glad you're here now. Sarah grinned, looking relieved. Thanks. And I'm ready to help. Just tell me what to do. Layla handed her a stack of cups. You can start by pouring some lemonade. We've already got a good crowd going. As the two friends worked side by side, Layla couldn't help but feel hopeful. The turnout was even better than she had expected, and with Sarah by her side, it felt like everything was falling into place. But just as Layla was starting to relax, a shadow fell across the stand. She looked up to see Chief Holloway standing a few feet away, his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. He was watching her closely, as though he were waiting for her to slip up. Everything in order here today? Holloway asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Layla straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. She held up the stack of permits, her voice calm and steady. Everything's in order, Chief. I have all the necessary paperwork right here. Holloway didn't bother to look at the permits. Instead, he narrowed his eyes at her, his voice low. Just because you have the paperwork doesn't mean this is over. You think you can defy me? You don't know what you're getting into, little girl. Layla's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. I'm not trying to defy anyone. I'm just trying to help people. That's all. Holloway stepped closer, his gaze hard and unrelenting. People like you always think you're doing something noble, but you don't understand the bigger picture. You think you can challenge the way things work around here? You'll regret it. Sarah, who had been watching the exchange in silence, finally stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. Why are you doing this? Layla's not doing anything wrong. She's just trying to raise money for a good cause. What's your problem? Holloway shot Sarah a withering look, but didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to Layla. This is your last warning. Watch yourself. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. Layla let out a shaky breath, her heart still racing. Sarah put a hand on her shoulder, her voice soft. Are you okay? Layla nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. Yeah, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Holloway's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she realized just how far he was willing to go to protect his version of Bridgestone. This wasn't just about a lemonade stand anymore. It was about something much bigger. As the afternoon wore on, more and more people stopped by the stand, offering their support. Some had heard about the incident with Holloway and wanted to show solidarity. Others were simply drawn in by the promise of helping children in need. But even with the outpouring of kindness from the community, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. That evening, as Layla sat with her parents at the dinner table, she recounted the day's events, including Holloway's warning. Her father listened in silence, his face growing more serious with every word. When she finished, David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "He's pushing you, Layla. He's trying to intimidate you because he sees you as a threat." Layla frowned, confusion washing over her. "But why? I'm not a threat to anyone. I'm just trying to raise money for health care." David shook his head. "It's not about the lemonade stand. It's about control. Holloway doesn't like seeing people challenge his authority, and he's worried that what you're doing could inspire others to do the same." Layla stared down at her plate, her mind racing. She had never considered herself a rebel, but somehow her simple act of charity had turned into something much bigger. "You're doing the right thing," David continued, his voice gentle. "But you need to be careful. Holloway's the kind of man who doesn't back down easily, and he's not above playing dirty." Lisa reached across the table to squeeze Layla's hand. "You've got us behind you, Layla, no matter what happens." Layla nodded, her heart filled with gratitude for her family's support. But deep down, she knew that the road ahead was going to be even tougher than she had imagined. The following Monday morning, as Layla walked through the halls of Bridgestone High, she could feel the weight of the weekend's events lingering around her. The tension from her latest confrontation with Chief Holloway was still fresh in her mind, but there was something else, something stronger. There was a growing sense of solidarity building within the community. As she made her way to her locker, several students offered her encouraging nods or quick smiles, gestures that hadn't been there the week before. The whispers she'd overheard before, filled with uncertainty and gossip, had shifted. Now, Layla was beginning to feel like a symbol of something bigger than herself, a rallying point for those who believed in standing up to the status quo. Sarah was already waiting for her by her locker, her face lit with excitement. "Layla, you're not going to believe this." "What's up?" Layla asked, grabbing her books and glancing at Sarah curiously. "You know how I told you people were talking about what happened with Holloway? Well, it's not just the students now. The PTA and a bunch of parents are talking about it too. A lot of them are upset about how he treated you, and they're organizing a community meeting this week to address it." Layla's eyes widened in surprise. "A community meeting? That's huge." Sarah nodded, her grin widening. "It's amazing, right? People are really starting to take notice of what's happening." "I think you've sparked something, Layla." Layla felt a rush of pride, but it was quickly tempered by a wave of uncertainty. She hadn't set out to cause a stir or make herself a target. All she had wanted was to raise money for children who needed health care. But now, the lemonade stand had become something far more significant. Something political. "I don't know, Sarah," Layla said slowly. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It's great that people are supporting me, but I don't want to make things worse. Holloway is already gunning for me." Sarah's expression softened, and she placed a reassuring hand on Layla's arm. "I get it. But you didn't do anything wrong. Holloway's the one who's out of line, and everyone knows it. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about standing up for what's right." Layla nodded, though the knot of anxiety in her chest hadn't fully loosened. She appreciated Sarah's support, but the reality of what lay ahead was daunting. Still, she knew she couldn't back down. Too many people were counting on her now. That evening, after school, Layla sat down with her parents to discuss the news about the upcoming community meeting. David, as always, listened carefully before offering his thoughts. "A community meeting is a good step," David said, his voice calm and measured. "It'll give people a chance to voice their concerns, and it'll put more pressure on Holloway. But you need to be prepared, Layla. This is going to draw more attention, both good and bad." Layla frowned, leaning back in her chair. "What do you mean?" David sighed, his expression thoughtful. "Right now, you've got a lot of people supporting you, but there will always be those who side with someone like Holloway. They may not be as vocal yet, but if they feel like their way of life is being threatened, they'll push back. And Holloway, he's not the type to let go of power without a fight." Lisa, who had been quiet until now, reached out to take Layla's hand. "You're strong, sweetheart. We believe in you, and we'll be there to support you at the meeting." Just know that this might not be easy." Layla nodded, feeling the weight of their words settle over her. She had always known that standing up for what was right would come with challenges, but now that the fight was becoming more public, the stakes felt higher. She wasn't just defending her lemonade stand anymore. She was standing up against something much bigger. The days leading up to the community meeting were a whirlwind of preparation and conversations. Word of the meeting had spread quickly, and Layla found herself at the center of it all. Supporters from different parts of Bridgestone reached out to her. Parents, students, and even some local business owners who wanted to show their solidarity. They all had the same message. They were tired of being pushed around by people like Chief Holloway, and they were ready for change. At school, Layla was approached by more students than ever before. Some shared their own stories of feeling targeted or marginalized in Bridgestone, while others simply offered words of encouragement. Even teachers quietly expressed their support, though Layla could sense their hesitation. Holloway's influence extended far beyond just the police department. He had allies throughout the town, and it was clear that some people were still afraid of crossing him. By the time the day of the community meeting arrived, Layla felt a mix of nerves and determination. She had prepared herself for the possibility that things could get heated, but she also knew that she had the support of her family and her community behind her. The Bridgestone Community Center was packed that evening. The normally quiet space filled with the murmur of voices and the occasional clatter of folding chairs being arranged. Layla, sitting between her parents and Sarah, scanned the room nervously. There were far more people than she had expected. Neighbors, parents, students, and local activists. At the front of the room, a small panel had been set up for the town officials, including Chief Holloway and the mayor, Karen Wilson. As the meeting began, Mayor Wilson stood up to address the crowd, her tone carefully neutral. "We're here tonight to discuss some recent concerns raised by members of our community. We're going to have an open forum where anyone can share their thoughts, but I ask that everyone remain respectful and civil." Layla watched as the mayor glanced toward Chief Holloway, who sat stiffly at the front of the room, his face expressionless. Layla could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as if everyone was waiting for the moment when the real conflict would begin. The first few speakers were parents and local residents, most of whom voiced their support for Layla and their frustration with the way Chief Holloway had handled the situation. One woman, Mrs. Jenkins, a mother of 3, spoke passionately about the need for the police to support the community instead of shutting down positive efforts like Layla's lemonade stand. "We should be encouraging our young people when they're trying to make a difference," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice firm. Layla wasn't hurting anyone. She was trying to help, and instead of supporting her, Chief Holloway tried to intimidate her. "That's not how we build a strong community." A ripple of applause followed her words, and Layla felt a surge of gratitude. But the moment of support was quickly overshadowed when the next speaker stepped up to the microphone. "I think everyone here needs to take a step back," said Mr. Rourke, a local business owner who had been a longtime supporter of Chief Holloway. His voice was cold as he addressed the room. "We've had a good system in place here in Bridgestone for years. The police are doing their job, keeping our town safe. If people start defying the rules, we're going to have chaos." Layla's jaw tightened as she listened to Mr. Rourke's words. This was exactly what she had feared, that there would be people who didn't want to see change, who would rather protect the status quo than support efforts to make the town better for everyone. The tension in the room continued to rise as more people spoke, with some siding with Layla and others backing Chief Holloway. It was clear that the town was divided, and the conflict was only growing. Finally, after what felt like hours of back and forth, Layla's father stood up, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. David's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable authority in his tone as he addressed the crowd. "I'm proud of my daughter for standing up for what she believes in," David began, his eyes scanning the room. Layla's lemonade stand wasn't just about raising money, it was about doing something good for the community. And instead of supporting that, Chief Holloway chose to shut her down. "That's not right. We need to ask ourselves what kind of town we want to live in. One where people are intimidated into silence? Or one where we encourage our young people to be active and engaged in making the world a better place? The room was silent, all eyes on David. Even Chief Halloway seemed to be listening more closely now, his expression unreadable. David continued, his voice steady. Layla followed the rules. She got the permits. She did everything by the book. But this isn't just about paperwork. It's about respect. Respect for the efforts of a young girl trying to make a difference. And I think we can all agree that's something worth supporting. A murmur of agreement spread through the room, and Layla felt her heart swell with pride for her father. He had always been a man of quiet strength, and seeing him speak out on her behalf filled her with gratitude. Mayor Wilson cleared her throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We'll take everything that's been said tonight into consideration as we move forward. With that, the meeting was adjourned, but Layla knew this wasn't the end. The lines had been drawn, and the fight for Bridgestone's future was far from over. The community meeting had made one thing clear. Bridgestone was deeply divided, and Layla had unwittingly become the face of a growing movement for change. What started as a simple lemonade stand had now turned into something far bigger, an all-out struggle for the town's identity. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. The days following the meeting were tense. Layla noticed more people approaching her in support, but also more hostile stares from those who seemed to agree with Chief Halloway. Bridgestone wasn't a large town, and word traveled fast. By midweek, everyone had taken sides, whether they wanted to or not. One afternoon, as Layla walked home from school, she found herself deep in thought. She had tried to focus on her classes, but her mind kept drifting back to the meeting, to the people who had stood up for her, and to those, like Mr. Rourke, who seemed determined to undermine her efforts. "Hey, Layla! Wait up!" Layla turned to see Sarah hurrying toward her, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. Her blonde hair whipped in the wind as she jogged to catch up. "Hey, Sarah!" Layla greeted her, forcing a smile. "What's up?" Sarah caught her breath, her eyes bright with excitement. "I just came from the library. Have you seen what's been happening online?" Layla raised an eyebrow. "No, I've been trying to stay away from social media lately. It's been intense. You should check it out," Sarah insisted, pulling out her phone and scrolling through her feed. "People are talking about what happened at the meeting. There's even a hashtag trending about it. #StandWithLayla. Layla's stomach flipped at the news. "What? Seriously?" Sarah nodded, handing her the phone. Sure enough, the screen was filled with posts, photos, and videos from the community meeting. Most of the comments were supportive, praising Layla for her bravery and calling for change in Bridgestone's leadership. But there were also plenty of posts from people who were angry, accusing her of stirring up trouble and claiming that Chief Halloway was only doing his job. "It's kind of crazy," Sarah said, her tone half excited, half concerned. "I mean, it's awesome that so many people are supporting you, but there are definitely some, well, not so friendly voices out there too." Layla scrolled through the posts, her emotions swirling. She hadn't asked for any of this, but now it was all happening so fast. The support was encouraging, but the backlash made her uneasy. "Yeah," Layla murmured, handing the phone back. "I guess I should have expected that." Sarah gave her a sympathetic look. "I know it's a lot, but this is bigger than just you now, Layla. People want change, and you're the one leading the way." Layla sighed, her mind buzzing with the weight of it all. "I know, but it's hard. I didn't mean to turn this into a fight. I just wanted to do something good, and now—" Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You are doing something good. Don't forget that." Layla managed a small smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I just hope I'm doing the right thing." By the end of the week, Layla's lemonade stand had become a symbol for more than just healthcare. It had become a battleground for the future of Bridgestone. The #StandWithLayla movement continued to gain traction, with more people showing up at the stand every weekend to buy lemonade, donate to the cause, or simply show their support. But with the rising support came rising opposition. Chief Halloway, clearly feeling the pressure, had begun taking more drastic measures. Layla noticed an increase in police presence around her stand. with officers frequently stopping by to check her permits or ensure she wasn't causing any disturbances. It was clear that Holloway was trying to intimidate her, but Layla refused to be rattled. One Saturday afternoon, as Layla and Sarah were pouring lemonade for a group of customers, a familiar voice interrupted the flow of conversation. "You're still at it, huh?" Layla looked up to see Jake Porter and a few of his football buddies standing nearby, their arms crossed and smirks plastered across their faces. Jake had never been subtle about his disdain for Layla, and it seemed he was ready to escalate things even further. Layla kept her tone calm. "Yep, still here. Can I get you a cup of lemonade?" Jake's smirk widened. "Nah, I think I'll pass. But I gotta say, I'm impressed. You've really managed to make a mess of this town." Sarah bristled, but Layla held up a hand, signaling her to stay calm. "I'm just trying to do something good," Layla said evenly. "I don't see how that's making a mess of anything." Jake shrugged, his smirk never faltering. "Maybe not, but you've definitely stirred things up. People are talking, and not all of them are happy about it." "People like you?" Sarah interjected, unable to hold her tongue any longer. Jake's eyes flicked to Sarah, but he didn't bother responding. Instead, he leaned in closer to Layla, his voice dropping to a low, threatening tone. "You should be careful, Thompson. Not everyone's as nice as me." Layla's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show any fear. She stood her ground, meeting Jake's gaze head-on. "I'm not afraid of you, Jake." For a moment, Jake's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, stepping back with a casual shrug. "Whatever you say. Just watch your back." With that, he and his friends sauntered off, leaving Layla and Sarah standing in tense silence. "That guy is such a jerk," Sarah muttered under her breath. "You want me to go after him and—" "No," Layla interrupted, shaking her head. "He's not worth it. He's just trying to scare me." Sarah looked at her with concern. "Are you okay?" Layla took a deep breath, trying to calm the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Yeah, I'm fine. I didn't realize how much this would turn into a fight." "You're stronger than him, Layla," Sarah said firmly. "And you've got a lot more people on your side." Layla nodded, though the encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. She hadn't expected this level of hostility, but she knew that Jake wasn't acting on his own. He was echoing the same resentment she had seen in Chief Holloway and others who wanted things in Bridgestone to stay the same. That night, as Layla sat at home with her parents, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. Jake's words had rattled her more than she wanted to admit, and the growing tension in town was starting to take its toll. David, sensing her discomfort, leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. "What happened today?" Layla hesitated for a moment before telling her parents about the encounter with Jake. As she spoke, she could see the flash of anger in her father's eyes, though he quickly masked it with his usual calm demeanor. "He's trying to intimidate you," David said quietly. "But that's all it is, talk. Don't let him get to you." "I know," Layla replied softly. "But it's not just Jake. It's everything. This whole thing is turning into something bigger than I ever wanted." David nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "That's what happens when you stand up for something important, Layla. People will push back. But you've got to decide how far you're willing to go. You're doing the right thing, but it won't be easy." Layla met her father's gaze, feeling the weight of his words. He had always been a man of quiet strength, and she knew that he had faced his own battles in the past. Battles he couldn't always talk about. "I'm not giving up," Layla said after a long pause. "But I'm scared, Dad. What if this gets worse?" David reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "If it does, we'll handle it. You're not alone in this. You've got us, and you've got the community behind you." Layla nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude for her parents' unwavering support. She knew that the road ahead would be tough, but with her family and her community by her side, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The following week, the tension in Bridgestone only grew, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Layla could feel it everywhere she went. At school, at home, and especially when she was at her lemonade stand. Chief Holloway's warning, coupled with Jake Porter's thinly veiled threat, left her with a constant sense of unease. But despite the growing pressure, Layla remained determined to keep going. That Saturday morning, Layla and Sarah set up the lemonade stand once again in front of the Bridgestone Community Center. The support from the community had only grown stronger, with more people stopping by to donate or buy lemonade. It was becoming clear that Layla's stand wasn't just a charity fundraiser anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance, a gathering point for those who wanted to see change in Bridgestone. As Layla poured lemonade for a local couple, Sarah nudged her gently. "Look who's here!" Layla glanced up and saw Officer Jack Cooper approaching the stand, his face serious but not unfriendly. Layla had seen him several times since the original incident with Chief Halloway, but he had always maintained a professional distance. This time, though, there was something different in his demeanor. "Officer Cooper," Layla greeted him, offering a polite smile. "Can I get you a cup of lemonade?" Cooper returned the smile, though it was a bit strained. "I'm off duty, so I'll take you up on that." As Layla poured him a cup, Cooper leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I wanted to stop by and let you know something. There's been talk around the station. Chief Halloway is getting more agitated. He's not happy with the attention your stand is getting, and he's planning something." Layla felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of something?" Cooper hesitated, glancing around before continuing. "I don't know all the details, but he's been pushing to increase patrols around the community center. He's calling it a safety measure, but it's pretty clear he's trying to find any excuse to shut you down again. He's not going to stop until he feels like he's in control." Layla's chest tightened with anger and frustration. She had done everything by the book. She had the permits, she followed the rules, and yet Halloway was still trying to undermine her. "Why is he doing this?" Layla asked, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not hurting anyone." Cooper sighed, his face softening. "It's not about you personally, Layla. It's about power. Halloway doesn't like feeling challenged, and right now, that's exactly what's happening. You've become a symbol, whether you meant to or not, and that scares him." Layla nodded slowly, processing his words. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed from someone inside the police department made it all the more real. "Thanks for the heads up," Layla said, handing him the cup of lemonade. "I appreciate it." Cooper took the cup and gave her a serious look. "Just be careful, okay? Things are heating up, and I don't want to see you get caught in the middle." Layla watched as he walked away, her mind racing. She had known from the beginning that this wasn't just about lemonade, but now it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. Chief Halloway was determined to assert his control, and Layla was standing directly in his way. That evening, Layla sat with her parents at the dinner table, recounting her conversation with Officer Cooper. David listened intently, his face growing more serious with every word. "So Halloway's planning something," David said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I figured he wouldn't back down, but this confirms it. He's trying to find a way to shut you down again, legally or otherwise." Layla nodded, her frustration bubbling up. "I just don't understand why he's going this far. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not doing anything wrong." David met her gaze, his expression calm but firm. "It's not about the law, Layla. It's about control. Halloway sees you as a threat because you're challenging the way things have always been done here. And when people in power feel threatened, they'll do whatever they can to keep that power." Lisa, who had been quiet until now, reached out to take Layla's hand. "We're with you, sweetheart. Whatever happens, we'll get through it together." Layla nodded, grateful for their support. But the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on her. She had always known that standing up for what was right would be difficult, but she hadn't expected it to feel like a battle for survival. "What should I do?" Layla asked, her voice quiet. "I don't want to back down, but I also don't want to make things worse." David leaned forward, his voice steady. "You keep doing what you're doing. You followed the rules. You've done everything right. Halloway's trying to push you into making a mistake, but as long as you stay calm and stick to the plan, he won't have anything to use against you." Layla nodded, feeling a flicker of determination reignite inside her. She wasn't going to let Halloway bully her into giving up. "I won't let him win," Layla said firmly. "I'm not backing down." The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Layla kept the lemonade stand running, but each day brought a new wave of tension. More police cars began to patrol the area, their presence unmistakable as they circled the community center and parked nearby. It was clear that Holloway was watching, waiting for her to slip up. But Layla refused to give him that satisfaction. She kept everything in order, making sure that every permit was displayed clearly, and that every part of the stand was in perfect compliance with the town's regulations. She wasn't going to give Holloway any excuse to shut her down. By midweek, Layla's supporters had grown even stronger. More people from the community were stopping by to show their solidarity, and the #StandWithLayla movement continued to gain momentum online. Local news outlets had even begun to take notice, with a few reporters stopping by to interview Layla about her stand and the growing conflict with Chief Holloway. But with the increased attention came increased hostility. Layla started receiving anonymous messages online, some supportive, but others filled with anger and resentment. It was clear that not everyone in Bridgestone was on her side, and the more attention her stand attracted, the more vocal her detractors became. One afternoon, as Layla and Sarah were packing up the stand for the day, a group of boys from the football team approached. Jake Porter, as always, was at the front of the group, his smirk even more pronounced than usual. "Well, well, well," Jake said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Still here, huh? I figured you'd be long gone by now." Layla straightened, refusing to let him get under her skin. "Still here, and I'm not going anywhere." Jake's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, stepping closer. "You really think you're making a difference, don't you? All you're doing is making things harder for yourself." Layla met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm not just doing this for me, Jake. This is for the community, for the people who need help." Jake rolled his eyes, his expression hardening. "You're so full of it. This town doesn't need people like you stirring up trouble. You think you can change anything? You're just making it worse." Layla's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Sarah stepped in, her voice sharp. "You don't get it, do you? Layla's actually doing something good. She's helping people, and all you're doing is trying to tear her down. Why don't you just leave us alone?" Jake's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked away, his friends trailing behind him. Layla watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thanks, Sarah," Layla said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah smiled, though there was a hint of frustration in her expression. "Jake's such a jerk. I just wish people like him and Holloway would leave you alone." Layla sighed, feeling the weight of the week's events pressing down on her. "Me too. But I'm not giving up." Sarah grinned, her eyes bright with determination. "Good, because I'm not letting you give up either." That night, as Layla lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind raced with thoughts of the days ahead. She knew that Holloway wasn't done. He was still watching, waiting for his chance. But she also knew that she couldn't back down. Not now. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fight for Bridgestone's future was far from over. But with her family, her friends, and her community behind her, Layla knew she had the strength to keep going. No matter what came next, she was ready. The tension in Bridgestone had reached a fever pitch. Layla could feel it everywhere. At school, in the town's quiet streets, and especially at the lemonade stand. The constant presence of police patrols and the thinly veiled hostility from Chief Holloway's supporters made every day feel like a test of her strength and resolve. By now, it wasn't just about lemonade or even about health care. The stand had become a symbol of something bigger, a challenge to the old guard of Bridgestone, a defiance of authority, and a rallying cry for those who wanted to see their town change for the better. Layla had become the face of that change, whether she had wanted to or not. It was early Saturday morning when the next major escalation came. Layla had just finished setting up her lemonade stand for the day, the sun casting long shadows over the community center. The previous night, she had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. The news of Chief Holloway's frustration, combined with the increasingly aggressive stance of some of his supporters, had left her on edge. She was always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next move. As Layla arranged the pitchers and cups on the table, Sarah arrived, her face bright with determination. "Ready for another day?" she asked, giving Layla a supportive smile. Layla nodded, though she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her stomach. "Yeah, I guess so. But something feels different today." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I don't know," Layla said, glancing around the quiet street. "It just feels like something's about to happen." Before Sarah could respond, a police cruiser slowly pulled up to the curb, its flashing lights cutting through the early morning stillness. Layla's heart sank as she recognized the figure stepping out of the car. Chief Holloway. He walked toward the stand with his usual cold, intimidating demeanor, his eyes scanning the setup with a look of disdain. Layla stood her ground, her heart racing, but she refused to let him see her fear. "Morning, Chief," Layla greeted him, her voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" Holloway's eyes narrowed as he approached the table. "You're still at it, I see, despite everything I've told you." "I'm following all the rules," Layla replied, lifting her chin. "I've got my permits, everything's up to code. There's no reason for you to shut me down." Holloway folded his arms across his chest, his expression hard. "That's what you think. But there are more ways to shut something down than just paperwork. You've made quite a mess of things in this town, Layla." Layla's stomach churned with anger, but she kept her voice calm. "I'm just trying to help people. I don't see how that's making a mess of anything." Holloway stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You don't know what you're getting into. People like you come in, thinking you can change things, thinking you know better. But this town has rules, and I'm here to make sure they're followed." Layla's pulse quickened. She knew exactly what he meant. People like her. The words stung, but they only strengthened her resolve. "I'm not breaking any rules," she said firmly, "and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, Holloway just stared at her, his eyes filled with thinly veiled contempt. Then, without warning, he turned to the small crowd that had begun to gather nearby, his voice booming. "You all think this is some noble cause?" he shouted, addressing the bystanders. "This girl and her lemonade stand? She's disrupting the peace, stirring up trouble where there shouldn't be any. If we let this go on, what's next? Chaos? Lawlessness? This isn't about lemonade, it's about defiance. And I won't stand for it." The crowd murmured, some looking uncomfortable, while others seemed emboldened by Holloway's words. Layla clenched her fists at her sides, feeling the heat of anger rising in her chest. She had done everything right, followed every rule, and still, Holloway was treating her like a criminal. Before she could respond, a voice from the crowd broke through the tension. "Leave her alone, Holloway. She's not doing anything wrong." Layla turned to see Mrs. Pamela Green stepping forward, her face fierce with determination. The retired physician had been one of Layla's biggest supporters from the start, and now she stood tall, unafraid of the police chief's authority. "This young woman is doing more for this community than you ever have, Mrs." Green continued, her voice clear and strong. "You're just trying to protect your power, but the people of Bridgestone are tired of being bullied." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd, and Layla felt a surge of gratitude for Mrs. Green's words. But the moment of solidarity was short-lived. Holloway's face flushed with anger, and he took a step toward Mrs. Green, his jaw clenched. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Green," he snarled. "This is about law and order. You don't get to decide what's best for this town." Ms. Green didn't back down. "Neither do you, Gerald. This town belongs to all of us, and we won't be intimidated anymore." The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the exchange. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the crowd watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Before anyone could speak again, Officer Jack Cooper appeared, stepping between Holloway and Mrs. Green. His face was calm, but his eyes were serious. "Chief," Cooper said quietly, his voice firm, "maybe it's time we take a step back. This isn't helping." Holloway shot him a sharp look, his voice dripping with frustration. "Stay out of this, Cooper. This is my town, and I'll handle it." Cooper stood his ground, his tone steady. "With all due respect, Chief, this is getting out of hand. Layla's following the rules. We can't keep pushing this." Layla's heart lifted slightly at Cooper's words, but the tension between him and Holloway was undeniable. For a moment, it seemed like things might calm down, but then Holloway took a step back, his voice cold and controlled. "Fine," he said, his gaze locked on Layla. "But mark my words, this isn't over. You think you can defy me, make a spectacle out of this? We'll see how long that lasts." With that, Holloway turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Layla watched him go, her mind racing. She had stood her ground, but it was clear that Holloway wasn't backing down. He had made it personal, and the fight was far from over. The crowd slowly began to disperse, murmurs of support and concern filling the air. "Ms.?" Green gave Layla a reassuring smile before heading back to her car, while Officer Cooper lingered for a moment, his face troubled. "You did good today," Cooper said quietly, his eyes meeting Layla's. "But be careful. Holloway's not going to let this go. He's not used to being challenged, and that makes him dangerous." Layla nodded, her heart still pounding. "Thanks for stepping in." Cooper gave her a small nod before walking back to his patrol car. As Layla and Sarah began to pack up the lemonade stand, the weight of everything that had happened settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had stood up to Holloway, but it had come at a cost. He wasn't going to stop until he regained control, and Layla knew that the next move he made could be even more dangerous. That night, as Layla sat at the kitchen table with her parents, she recounted the events of the day. David listened in silence, his face growing more serious with each passing minute. Lisa placed a comforting hand on Layla's shoulder, her expression filled with concern. "Holloway's trying to push you into a corner," David said finally, his voice low. "He wants you to make a mistake. He's not going to stop until he feels like he's won." Layla nodded, her frustration bubbling up. "I don't know how to make him stop. I've followed all the rules, but it's like he's determined to find a way to take me down." David leaned forward, his eyes filled with the quiet strength that Layla had always admired. "You keep doing what you're doing. You've got the law on your side, and more importantly, you've got the community on your side. Holloway can't win if people stand up to him." Layla took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. "I won't let him scare me off. I'll keep fighting." Lisa smiled softly, her eyes shining with pride. "That's my girl. We're with you every step of the way." The following week, the tension in Bridgestone felt like a heavy cloud that no one could shake. Layla knew something big was coming. Every time she passed a police cruiser, her pulse quickened, and every glance from the townspeople felt loaded with meaning. It was clear that Chief Holloway wasn't done. He was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. At school, the atmosphere was no different. Some students whispered about her in the hallways, while others stopped her to offer words of encouragement. Sarah stuck by her side, always ready with a reassuring smile or a sharp word for anyone who dared to say something negative. Layla appreciated the support, but the constant pressure was exhausting. She couldn't go anywhere in town without being reminded that the fight wasn't over. It felt like she was carrying the weight of the entire community's hopes and fears on her shoulders. By the time Saturday rolled around, Layla could feel the weight of the week pressing down on her like never before. She arrived at the lemonade stand early, setting up the table with her usual careful attention to detail. The bright yellow cloth, the freshly squeezed lemonade, the stack of cups. It was all so familiar, yet today felt different. As the morning wore on, the crowd at the stand began to grow. More people than usual showed up, and Layla could sense that something was in the air. It wasn't just about the lemonade stand anymore. It was about standing up to Chief Holloway, about refusing to be silenced. Ms. Pamela Green was one of the first to arrive, her face calm but determined. She gave Layla a warm smile as she handed over a few dollars for a cup of lemonade. "You're doing good work here, Layla, Ms." Green said softly. "Don't forget that." Layla smiled back, though the tension in her chest hadn't eased. "Thanks, Ms." "Green, I just hope it's enough." "Ms." Green's eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom. "It's more than enough. You've already done more than most people would have dared to." As the day continued, more familiar faces appeared, people who had been supporting Layla since the beginning, as well as new faces drawn in by the growing buzz around the stand. Sarah was there, of course, helping pour lemonade and chatting with customers, her usual energy undiminished. But despite the supportive crowd, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. And then it did. Around midday, a hush fell over the crowd as a line of police cruisers pulled up to the curb across from the community center. Layla's heart sank as she saw Chief Holloway step out of the lead car, his expression hard and resolute. Behind him were several other officers, including Officer Jack Cooper, who looked uncomfortable but resolute. The crowd parted as Holloway strode toward the lemonade stand, his eyes fixed on Layla. The tension in the air was thick, and Layla could feel every gaze in the crowd on her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to come. Holloway stopped in front of the stand, his voice cold and commanding. "Enough is enough, Thompson. This has gone on far too long." Layla met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I have my permits. I'm following the law." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "It's not about permits anymore. You've been stirring up trouble, disrupting the peace in this town. This has gone far beyond a simple lemonade stand. I'm shutting you down, for good." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but Layla stood her ground. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "You can't shut me down without cause. I've done everything by the book. This isn't about the law, it's about control, and you know it." Holloway's face flushed with anger. "You think you can stand up to me? You think you can challenge the authority in this town and get away with it?" At that moment, Ms. Green stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "This young woman is doing something good for our community. She's followed the rules, and she's helping those who need it. You're the one overstepping your authority, Gerald." The crowd erupted in agreement, their voices growing louder as more people voiced their support for Layla. For a brief moment, Holloway seemed taken aback by the strength of the response, but he quickly recovered, his expression darkening. "This isn't a debate," Holloway growled. "I'm shutting this down now." Before Layla could respond, Officer Cooper stepped forward, his face tense. "Chief, I think we need to reconsider. She's not breaking any laws. This is peaceful. The community is behind her." Holloway shot Cooper a furious glare. "Are you questioning my authority, officer?" Cooper held his ground, his voice steady but resolute. "No, Chief. I'm just saying that we need to think about what's best for the town. This isn't the way to handle this." Layla's heart swelled with gratitude as she watched Officer Cooper stand up to Holloway. But she could see the anger simmering in the police chief's eyes, and she knew this was far from over. Suddenly, Holloway stepped forward, his hand reaching for Layla's lemonade stand, as if to tear it down himself. But before he could make a move, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Enough!" The crowd turned to see David Thompson, Layla's father, stepping through the gathering of people. His usually calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet fury that sent a ripple of tension through the air. He walked straight up to Holloway, placing himself between the police chief and his daughter. "This stops now," David said, his voice low but filled with authority. "You've overstepped, Chief. You're trying to shut down my daughter's stand without cause, and that's not going to happen." Holloway's eyes flicked to David, his jaw clenched in anger. "You don't get to tell me how to run my town, Thompson." David's eyes were hard, unyielding. "I'm not telling you how to run the town. I'm telling you to follow the law. Layla hasn't done anything wrong, and you know it. You're trying to intimidate her, but that's not going to work anymore." The tension between the two men was palpable, the crowd watching in silence as the confrontation unfolded. For a moment, it seemed like Holloway might lash out, but then something shifted. Maybe it was the growing number of phones raised in the crowd, recording every moment. Maybe it was the sheer force of the community standing behind Layla. Whatever it was, Holloway's expression faltered, his bravado cracking just enough for doubt to creep in. "This isn't over," Holloway spat, his voice filled with frustration. "You think you've won, but you haven't." With that, Holloway turned on his heel and stormed back to his car, his officers following in his wake. The crowd remained silent, stunned by the sudden turn of events. As the police cruisers pulled away, the tension in the air began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of relief. Layla let out a shaky breath, her legs trembling beneath her. Sarah rushed to her side, her face bright with excitement. "Layla, you did it! You stood up to him!" But Layla shook her head, her voice quiet. "No, we did it. All of us." David placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with pride. "You were brave today, Layla. You didn't back down. That's something to be proud of." Layla smiled, though she could still feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The fight wasn't over, not completely. But for now, it felt like a victory. As the crowd began to disperse, people came up to Layla, offering words of encouragement and congratulations. "Ms.?" Green gave her a warm hug, whispering, "You've done something amazing today, Layla. Don't ever forget that." Layla stood there, surrounded by her family, her friends, and her community, feeling a sense of pride and relief wash over her. It had been a long, hard road, and there were still challenges ahead. But she had stood up for what was right, and she had refused to be silenced. And in that moment, as the sun set over Bridgestone, Layla knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice, for equality, for a better future, it would continue. But she was ready for it. She was stronger than ever. In the weeks that followed, Layla's stand continued to thrive. The support from the community grew even stronger, and the #StandWithLayla movement gained attention beyond Bridgestone, with people from neighboring towns coming to show their support. Chief Holloway, after the public confrontation, faced growing pressure from the town's leadership. His authority, once unchallenged, began to wane, and it wasn't long before the town council called for a formal investigation into his actions. With the community rallying behind Layla, it became clear that change was coming to Bridgestone. As for Layla, she remained focused on her original goal, helping children access health care. Her lemonade stand had become a symbol of something far greater, but she never lost sight of why she had started it in the first place. And as she looked ahead to the future, she knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. She had stood up to injustice, and in doing so, she had inspired an entire community to believe in something better. And for Layla, that was the most important victory of all. If you enjoyed Layla's inspiring story of standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We've got more uplifting stories and important conversations coming your way. Be sure to click the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if this story touched you, share it with your friends and family. Let's keep spreading the message of hope, courage, and the power of community. Thanks for watching, and remember, every small action can lead to big change.